1 second. And we're back on A Mighty Blaze. It's Pub Day Tuesday and it's debut. I mean, that's even more special. Pub Day is one thing, but a debut is another thing. And we're very happy to have Samir Pandya on today. And his book is Members Only. And I mean, this is just, we're going to talk about it. It is just one of those books that you're going to want to read and you're going to tell your friends, and we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to give Samir an intro. Samir was longlisted for the PEN Open Book Award for his story collection, The Blind Writer, and is a recipient of a PEN Civitella. Is that right? Is that how I say it?
Yep.
Fellowship. His writing has appeared in The Atlantic, Salon, and elsewhere. He teaches at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and you can visit his site at samirpandya.net. Did somebody have .com? Did someone take your name?
Yeah, in fact, yes, someone did have .com, and you know, it's funny. It's also in my email. There's a little I have a particular letter, and so for the past 3 years, another Samir Pandya has been getting a ton of my emails, and he very sweetly forwards me the emails and says, "I think this is for you," and we've struck up a little bit of a friendship. He lives in Philadelphia.
I would think so, right? Because there's something about having that name and then your email, and if it's just one little letter off or something like that.
Totally.
You share, I know Ellen Hildebrand is still .net, and there are a few other great writers that have the .net, so you're in wonderful company.
That's nice to be in that company, yeah.
Right? It's a little known fact, a little throwaway party line, and we're thrilled to have you here on A Mighty Blaze on Pub Day. It's been a really big day and rave reviews everywhere. It's members only. Of course, I go immediately to members only jacket back in the day. That's why, as soon as I saw the cover. And it's a tennis club for members only. There's so much about this book. And Samir and I were talking in the green room about conversations and way into uncomfortable conversations. And this is definitely going to be one of those. No, I'm only kidding. And how important humor is in having discussions. And certainly we are at, I mean, we've been saying pivot and pivotal time. And so this book was due to come out a little sooner, but still you wrote it not knowing it was going to come out at this time. So let's start there. What's it like having your debut novel about a really important topic coming out right in the middle of the most important conversation this country's had?
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you, Robin, for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, no, it is very much an interesting time for us all to be kind of living and existing and conversing with one another. It is also an interesting time for me to publish this book. And, I will just, briefly, the book is kind of thinking about one of the ways in which I talk about race in terms of one of the phrases that I use is living in the brown space between black and white. And I think what I want us to think about and kind of why it feels pertinent, particularly to this moment, right? Which is we are collectively having a conversation about race, right? And in some ways, my earliest sense of what I wanted to think about and write about was what we talk about when we don't talk about race, right? When we do not deal with the topic that is in the room, that is in many ways in all of our rooms, right? And I began with that. And I began with that is because in a way to contrast the fact that much of this novel deals with this conversation. There are all sorts of other things that the novel is dealing with, and I'm happy to chat about that. So what I'm hoping is that in this particular context, that this book can add a layer to that conversation, right? A layer to the ways in which we have talked about race, and particularly the ways in which we need to talk about race and be explicit about it. So much of this book is talking about implicit forms of race and racism. And I think in shining a light on that implicitness, I also want us to kind of think about the explicit versions of it as well.
And there's no better way. I really feel like that's what books do. And so having that conversation. So how do you and I've had this conversation a lot. I've had always really very mindful, well, on I Mighty Blaze and also on Reading with Robin, with having a diverse author selection. And then of course that goes back to publishing and what's being published, and hearing, getting more authors published and voices out there. So like that became such a discussion. And our way in here is through books and through conversation. But I think it's very interesting what's implied and what's not spoken about. I had Asha and Ali on the show. Tiny Imperfections is their book. And so we had that conversation, and it was illuminating. And also the feedback that I get from readers it makes me really hopeful that the conversation is getting, maybe the books are a good way in.
Yeah.
So
I think about the act of reading as an act of empathy, right? And I think that it is a radical thing that we do when we read books, right? We read books about lives that are different than ours, right? And I think the radicalness comes in our ability to occupy kind of internal kind of dialogues, to occupy stories and conversations that we wouldn't occupy otherwise, right? And I think that this is where, in some ways, so much of these conversations are occurring around novels, that are occurring around works of nonfiction, right? Is because that there is that empathy that goes on. But I also think that what's profound about it is that for the most part, we sit and read books by ourselves, right? Which is when we could go to movies, we all went together, right? It was a crowd, and you listen to the crowd kind of go up and down to gauge your own emotions, right?
Interesting, yeah.
For the most part, we're solo, and we're doing it solo. And I think that moment of quiet is incredibly important to kind of think through what it is that we are reading.
Because, yeah, when I was reading this, so we'll set it up. We have Raj, who a lot happens to this poor guy in 1 week. He's you've thrown a lot at your character, and something happens at the beginning of the book, and also, so he says something. Well, talk about the setup at the club and the committee and all of this, the tennis club, TC, yep. But also the idea of saying something that you're maybe thinking and you're not quite sure if it came out, and then, or the way it was intended, was such a crushing. I was reading it going, because like, I kind of felt like I knew what Raj was trying to say. I felt like that, but how it would be received. And just the moment that so much is like sort of coming out in that moment that he's feeling, or what he really means, or how it's received. It's just so fraught. And I thought, was that something that you knew going into the story was going to be that jumping off point?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I wanted to set up a minefield, right?
Right, you did that. You did that very well, Samir.
Right. So that in a way that once you set up that minefield, right? And I had some sense of it, right? I had a sense of this character in my mind, kind of this middle-aged Indian American man, and I'd been thinking through various ways, what kind of story to place him in, right? And I think before I knew exactly the story I wanted to place him in, I was trying myself to figure out kind of in what I kind of referred to earlier as what this brown space looks like, right? And I wanted to, so what the committee in the beginning, right, which is what the novel begins with, which is Raj Bhatt, who's Indian American, the 4 other committee members who are white, an African American couple that comes in, and they're being sponsored by a white couple, right? And so to literally formulate a scene where Raj is kind of existing in this space between blackness and whiteness, right? And and to create all the tension that goes with that. And hopefully what I've tried to do is that once, in some ways, that mind goes off, what the rest of the novel is trying to work through is the kind of, the emotional and the cultural shrapnel that everyone feels and everyone experiences and everyone is trying to engage with. And so that's the kind of the structure of what I tried to set up here.
And it's loaded because when you realize, so this has happened, and then reading the story from Raj's, mind, thinking of all the times that he felt things were said around him and nobody spoke up about it. And then here he says, I mean, do we give it away in this book? I don't know. It's out today. It's a debut. It's members only. It's such a good book. And visit Samir's site at samirpandya.net. And we'll put that down, and also find him on Instagram, right? Twitter, everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
Everywhere. Find him everywhere. So really thinking about all of the sort of stuff that one stuffs inside and holds, when you hold, where you want to say something, but you're fitting in, and where do you belong, and why now? Why now is what he said was, not cool, but it was maybe misunderstood, but, this reaction and what the committee expects of him.
And, and part of, let me be clear that what Raj does is categorically wrong, right?
No, yes.
He makes, I think we're both in agreement about that. He makes a horrific mistake, right? Yes. But I think that what he is trying to figure out is, okay, there is the mistake, right? But the question here, and of course, immediately afterwards, everyone wants him to apologize. And I think what Raj is trying to figure out is, what does it mean for him to apologize, right? What is who is asked to apologize for things, and who gets forgiven for those apologies, right? Is one of the things that I'm trying to work out here, right? And I think that he is, the internal kind of dialogue or the monologue that's going on in his head is to say, but I've had some interesting experiences here. There is clearly not the same kind of reaction, right? And I think while recognizing that the two scenarios are very different, it is still an occasion for him to think about the experiences that he's had in the place.
Yeah, and that's where you talk about the experience of Brown in the middle of this huge talk right now of Black and white, race, class, privilege, and all of this. And so you've set this as an immigrant story, midlife crisis, and college, like three of my favorite topics in novel to explore. That age, that what does it all mean, and where's my place, and what's important to me, and what do I want to pass on to my children. And also I thought it was really beautiful in the book, Raj's, his father is gone 10 years or so. He's trying to sort of channel what would his father tell him, or what were the things he was, that he was taught, and sort of trying to draw upon that at a time when things seem like they've gotten out of hand.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So I think forever, and however long ever is, I've been reading, the tradition of the immigrant novel, not just in the Indian American case, but in, the Jewish American tradition, like all sorts of kind of American, within the American tradition, right? I love, long before I became middle-aged, I love the midlife crisis novel, right? Which is in many ways, and specifically, usually, that tradition has been filled with men kind of losing their minds, right? And kind of going off, wandering off and finding themselves, and maybe coming back, maybe not coming back, right? And then the third is, of course, the campus novel. And part of that is that's where I've literally, since I was 18 years old, I have been on a college campus, right? For college, graduate school, and my teaching life, right? And so as I was writing this thing, what I realized at a certain point, and I don't think one realizes it, I didn't sit down and say, these are the genres I'm working in. I suddenly, at some point, I'm like, wow, this is these are the things that are affecting me, that are shaping the structure of the book. And what I was particularly interested in doing was in bringing all three of these together. What they hopefully do is they help us rethink each of these traditions, so that the campus novel traditionally does not have, for example, a brown character at the center of it, right? And so I wanted to, in some ways, think about how race shapes that tradition. And at the same time, with the immigrant novel, I wanted to kind of think about a character for whom immigration is a very, very distant memory, right? He is not a new arrival. He's not engaged in any of that. In some ways, he's forgotten his arrival. And so in bringing them together, hopefully what I can do is help us rethink what we think about when we say what the contemporary campus novel looks like or the contemporary midlife crisis novel looks like.
And that's one of the things I so enjoy. And I can think of many examples of a new take on these same, scenarios where it's a whole different perspective. And, that's exciting. These are, you're reading different experience, and because that human experience is so universal, but coming at it from impossibly different expectations and rules and all of this. And so it was funny when you were talking about the middle-aged white man sort of midlife crisis. I was thinking of my friend Susan Jane Gilman, Don Has Left the Building, and that's her like Jewish woman odyssey, like leaving and taking it on the road kind of thing. And there's something about a midlife crisis. I don't know what it is, but it's very familiar. Will you read a little bit to us?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. So I was just going to read just the first, just the opening bit, so you get a sense, a little. The novel is told in the first person, the voice of Raj Bhatt, and so I'll just start there. The first chapter is called Sunday. We were just starting our third night of interviews, and I felt that kind of weariness that comes from having wasted time. Raj, I said, introducing myself to the first couple. The man was wearing a casual half-sleeve shirt, and his wife was refreshingly unremarkable. In a loose dress, her hair in a simple ponytail. I liked them for it, but only for about 10 seconds. Raj, the wife asked, leaning in. It was a question I had been asked too many times in my life. Raj, I exaggerated. As in Federer. I feigned a smile, unsure if she was joking. They moved on, introducing themselves to the rest of the membership committee. The committee, Suzanne, the efficient and disciplined chair, Stan, a balding 60-ish lawyer, Richard, a leather-skinned club pro, Leslie, a childhood friend of my wife, and I had a particularly difficult task. Over the course of 2 evenings the previous week, we had already spoken with 10 different couples about why they wanted to join the tennis club. Simple nouns elevated to proper noun status. Tonight, we would talk to still more and then choose 5 out of the total 15 to let in. The club had opened several decades before, in the early 70s, when couples were riding high from breaking rules in the 60s and yet wanted to make sure their children knew how to slice a backhand properly. The original membership had been a mixture of old money and lawyers and doctors, all of whom downplayed the breadth of their bank accounts. But the past several years had brought the movie and hedge fund people who'd bought up the old estates and come driving into town in cars that were never more than a year old. As the town's gilding glowed ever brighter, the club, or the TC as it was known among members, had continued on, a simple place with 8 courts, a swimming pool, and a rustic clubhouse with worn wicker couches. No flat screen TVs, no towel service. There was a soda machine that still charged 50 cents for a Coke. Simplicity was the brand, and the simpler it stayed, the more people wanted to join, perhaps to rub off some of their new money sheen. The membership committee was tasked with bringing in families that had some sense of that earlier, understated ethos, as well as some of the newer sort who paid their monthly dues, but generally preferred to use their home swimming pools and tennis courts. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Samir. It's, did you do the audio version or?
I did not do the audio version. A really talented actor and voice actor named Sunil Malhotra did it. And I was just actually listening to a bit of it last night. And, it's quite a thrill listening to your voice being voiced by somebody else.
Yeah, it must be because, you have your take on it and then there's nuance and, but I just really enjoyed listening to you. So that's why I figured I'd ask. You're welcome. And it's fun. I mean, it's funny. So it opens up like that and it grabs you. I mean, right away, I am invested in who's Raj, what, what is he doing with these, he's bored with these people. And I'm just like imagining, so what's going through his head when he meets Bill and, is it Victoria?
Valerie.
Valerie. Okay, I got the V. Bill and
Yeah.
Valerie come, and he, I mean, you can, it's at the beginning of the book, you can say he slips up, but he doesn't mean it. He means it playfully, doesn't he? Or like in a way of trying to connect.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just kind of back up for a second and just say, so, they've gone through these interviews and, they've not had, he was hoping for a more diverse set of possibilities. And this couple walks in, right? And in some ways, he is excited that they're there for the larger kind of possibilities of what the place can look like. But I think one of the main things I wanted to get across is that he feels both this instant connection to the man, Bill Brown, and I think at the same time feels envy for him. He feels envious of how good of a tennis player he is. He feels envious of how good kind of he looks in his jacket, right? How good he is kind of, in some ways, the way in which he owns this room that he walks into in a way that Raj himself cannot feel like he can own rooms. And so, as it kind of moves forward, as this kind of conversation moves forward, it's that playfulness and that desire for connection and envy. That's the kind of minefield. That's
what I thought.
that I kind of bring together there. Yeah.
That's how I read it. But then it's like, did I say that? Well, you guys are going to have to read it to find out, what did Raj say? What did he say? And to pick up a copy of Members Only and visit sameerpandya.net for more information, and find him on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and do not miss this book. It's so many elements that I so enjoy in a book. It's told in a different way, in a new story, in a complicated yet just like compulsively readable book. And I took notes and I wrote stuff all over it, but it's just, it's just a joy because it's so, the pacing is so there. And the idea of, I know there was something that he's thinking about, another essay that would be good to write, but he's not going to write them. Like, is that something? And we should talk about how, there are many similarities, and it's not an autobiographical debut novel, but there are, I read somewhere the good stuff is you and the other stuff is not you. But you take things like that, and I was wondering, do you always get ideas for essays and think, I won't write it, or was that you?
Oh, I mean, my God. I mean, I think I have, a box on my desktop called Current Ideas, and
really?
There's so many of them, right? Like there are so many things that, I mean, I think that this is one of the things that I've learned, and I think I put this into Raj a little bit, right? Which is, in many ways, starting a project is the most hopeful, possible, amazing thing, is because when you are like just starting and have this idea in your mind, you think you're going to produce something remarkable, right? It's because you've actually not done the work of sitting down and working, right? And so I think that is a part of, I kind of wanted to kind of give that sense that Raj has, which is he starts something, but then he can't finish it. And this is also kind of what I also wanted to point out, is that there is an entire second part of the book, or the second strand of the book, that takes place in his life at the university, right? And particularly, and this is what I tried in, to our conversation about the campus novel, what I really was interested in here was that Raj is not a tenured middle-aged professor going through a crisis, right? That his crisis is precisely because he does not have the kind of security, the kind of membership into this job that he wants to have, right? And so that the tennis story is, I think, one important strand, and that literally I put him in these middle of these two strands, right? Is because, of course, when he arrives and gives this lecture that he's been giving for years, which he loves giving, he gives without notes, right? He, of course, gets accused, like the committee accuses him of racism. Another committee in some ways accuse him of something very, very similar, right? And I try to kind of, to our point about placing him in the middle, he is literally between these two narratives.
Yeah, and it was, I think that's another thing that I always appreciate when I'm reading, because it's very clever. And you've set up so much for this poor guy, but who certainly means what, he's such a likable, affable fellow, I think. And then there he is being accused, right, of having an anti-Western idea, right? Is that
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
thing. But also just the whole metaphor of stringing the racket and the club and I don't know, just all of it. So I'm thinking about your box of current ideas. Do you cross it off and write not so current? Do you just like keep going on the box?
It just gets bigger and bigger. But I think what I will say is that one of the things that I have learned is that when I do that, right, which is I seem to, and it may be wrong, right? But I remember, I think maybe Grace Paley had talked about this, which is that often the way in which she wrote her stories was that she would kind of produce these blocks, and the job later was to create the through line for why these kind of pieces fit together, right? And so in some ways, I don't actually mind that box on my desktop, because I know that a piece may not work in the moment in which I'm writing it, right? And that's heartbreaking, right? When you write, or when I write, as I think everyone does, they don't write to discard, right? They write to keep. And so when you need to discard it or when you need to put it away, it hurts. But I think in all the various stops and starts, I think one thing I've learned is it's there and you'll go back to it. And the creative process is that messy and that nonlinear, that the key, of course, is just to save it, right? Is to not get rid of it, not trash it. And things read better if you leave it aside for a while. I've always found the things that I feel incredibly embarrassed about, or feel like I've kind of dashed it off, a little bit of time does wonders for it.
A little bit of perspective. And yeah, and so what was it like too? I mean, this is your first book, and that's like a huge big deal, and it goes through such a process, and then there it comes. I mean, what was that like, receiving that box of your, I assume you received a box of books. I don't know in this day and age how they arrive, but still.
I got, no. So this is, my debut novel. And so,
right, you had the collection. So.
The collection of stories. Yeah. It is heartening to get this physical thing, right? It is heartening because I know that it went through drafts and drafts and drafts, right? It went from a kernel of an idea to a set of notes, right? And so having this with me, right, seeing it for the first time is, I don't know, kind of, there must be some German word for that emotion, right? Which is
right. You in the book you talked about a German word too, right?
Exactly. Word. Yeah, I think I have a line in there about kind of that there must be a German word about kind of sadness at the heart of joy, right?
There's always some misery in it. Yeah.
Yeah, but with this, I just think it's actually not just the sadness and the joy, but it's the sheer act of doing the work and feeling the pleasure and knowing that you kind of skirted through all of this to get to this physical thing that is yours, right? That is going to be kind of on your bookshelf, that, and you'll go through disappointing times, and that thing is there. It's like it's like this package of a creative process that kind of that is there for you, and that is, in some ways that is there for others, so that, I often tell my students, when you buy books, when I'm teaching the books, please go ahead and write up in the margins.
I agree.
Because 10 years later, when you still have this book, you're going to want to open it up and look at the ways in which you were thinking when you were 19 and 20 years old, right? You want some biography of your previous self. And in some ways, getting this thing is this feeling, which is, this is a moment or a history of a creative period, and then you move on to something else.
Yeah.
But this period has been kind of created and kind of put between covers, and that's a great feeling.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I also think, like we were saying at the beginning of this chat, now, this conversation now. So what would you like, what would be your best case scenario of the conversations that will be started around members only?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked in all sorts of various aspects of this book, right? And I think the primary, one of the kind of main things I want to come out of this is, in a way, to recognize that race in America is a kind of founding aspect of our collective lives, right? It operates in multiple ways. It operates in kind of the ways in which the protests have been trying to articulate and have done a remarkable job in articulating. And it operates in some of the implicit ways in which I lay out in this book, right? And all of those narratives work together, right? That is the thing, is that it has been such a consistent social force, a consistent economic force in our lives, is because there is no singular form of it, right? And so I think that knowing that it operates not just out there, but in our lives, in the places that we hold dear, right? That is what I hope this book does, right? Which is, by telling this one very particular story of an Indian American man having a really crummy week, right? Which is a crummy week that all of us, I think, can relate to.
Yeah.
From that, the notion, the idea that this is a conversation we've been having on kind of how race affects our collective lives. And it is a conversation we need to keep having, right? Is because there are all sorts of other things to do. But as a novelist, this is kind of what I am offering, right? This is the part of the argument that I am pushing forward.
And I can only imagine the conversations and the book club meetups and really examining, because you speak to people and they will insist that they are not racist, they do not have these thoughts, and they don't often even recognize what that is, what it means, so that it's a way into a conversation. And there's some really, I'm hopeful that I just don't ever remember a time when there was so much conversation and so much just everything being challenged and looked at and examined and perhaps tossed about. And again, books are a way in. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
I'm always hopeful. And it is, plus it's a really great book. It's just, I mean, as you were reading it, I was chuckling, and I remember, many times, I mean, laughter is incredibly important. It's I mean, to me, it's a way through. And if ever there was a time when we need to remember to laugh a little bit, it would be now, on top of all of these really important conversations and stories and sharing stories and really thinking about things, and not just sort of just, well, this is the way it's done and this is what we say, why do we say that, and why is this okay, why is that not okay? And it's just a great book, and I'm really excited to share it today on A Mighty Blaze. What are you reading, Samir? What are some of your, I see books behind you, but I don't know if I'm always peeking in someone's.
Yeah, I can show you. I mean, I just finished this incredible book, which I think came out about a year ago. This is the book about a tribe called Quest, which is a great hip hop band that I kind of grew up with in the 90s, and it's a kind of incredible social history. This is the book by Hanif Abdurraqib. This is a love letter to a group and a sound in an era. I love this book. The other writer. What's that?
And that was the 90s. Is that what you were saying? And we were talking.
Yeah, I mean, I think this book came out, last year, but it's about this kind of period in the early 90s. music is a big part of this book.
Yes, I love the musical references and
Yeah,
the melody.
and so it is in the way that it operates. And so I find myself kind of reading a ton of just a ton of stuff about books, a ton of kind of books about music. I think that's a really kind of a fun thing to do. I just finished, I'm in conversation this evening with Ivy Pakoda, and she has this amazing new book out called These Women. And so there's all sorts of, I think, very, very good stuff that,
That's cool.
all of us. So go ahead.
No, where are you doing that so people can watch tonight if they'd like? Where is
I have two events this week. The first one is through the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, and you can just go through their website, and it's a very easy thing to register for. And on Thursday evening through Book Soup, which is a great bookstore in Los Angeles, I am doing a conversation with Jade Chang.
Dang, I saw that. I met Jade when I was in California. I did an event with her at Janelle Brown's.
Oh, that's right. Who wrote Pretty Things, the book that just came out. Yeah.
We did an event, and Annabelle Gurwitch, and we were at Janelle's, and Jade was there. Is she working on a new book, I hope? Can you ask her?
I will ask her.
I loved her book. Okay.
Yeah,
so
The Way of the World is a great book.
Oh my God, I love that so much.
So, but if you go to my website, sameerpandya.net, there's a events page, and all the links are there. This is the new world of book tours.
That's it. Just go on the website and check it out. It's sameerpandya.net, and it was such a pleasure to have you on. And it's members only. Will you hold up yours? I didn't realize. I guess I have do I have a galley? You have a hardcover.
I have a hardcover.
I don't. Uh-oh, I need a hardcover. Okay, here it is.
But they're both versions.
Yeah, they're both versions. I'll tell you, hey, the story is the same. That's the important part. It's really, it's fabulous, and it's members only, and it's today, and it's pub day, and I'm thrilled that we could celebrate it with you on A Mighty Blaze today, Sameer.
Hey, Robin, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your engagement with the book. One of the genuine pleasures of publishing a book is finding readers, and I really, it will never cease to kind of touch me when people read and engage with this thing that has been in my head for so long. So thank you so much.
I'm looking forward to seeing what else comes out of your head and out of your box of ideas. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.